Hello, everybody. It's Mr. Bascom. I'm going to try something a little bit different. Usually I have a live stream and I just kind of talk to kids and take questions and kind of, try to give you some words of wisdom and mention some things that are coming up and what have you. Here, I'm going to try and straight talk about historical moments in our time that sometimes gets overlooked. And we're going to talk today about Thomas Nast versus Boss Tweed. As we're starting to enter the unit about politics and reform, there was a great need for change in government and the way that government managed a society, because since our country had grown so quickly in the late 1800s due to immigration, due to industrialization, due to migration of former slaves to the north and bigger cities, there was a lot of need for change because the politicians were running wild, and Boss Tweed is the biggest example of that. And he was brought down incredibly by a cartoonist, by political cartoons. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And here we go. One of the most famous or infamous, which is more than famous, which is famous for the worst of reasons. One of the most infamous political machines of the late 19th century was the Tweed Ring, and it was led by Boss William Tweed. He was a New York State senator. He was a member of the New York City Board of Supervisors. He was a member of several influential boards of companies and corporations. He was the third largest landowner in New York State at that time. And he was essentially the leader of the New York City political machine. A political machine is just sort of a process in which things are done. The way the process in how laws are passed and how those in power maintain power. It is not an actual physical device, not made out of wood or wire or metal or anything like that, but it's just a process in which the way things were done. And from 1861 to 1871, for that several-year period of time, Tweed and his group, his associates, known as the Tammany Hall Machine, they would take public money and collect it via taxes, and then they would overcharge for city projects and salaries. And then they would take that extra money to keep themselves in power. They'd keep themselves in power by bribing officials, including police and judges and investigators and other politicians. And this would keep them in power. And it sort of worked like this. The Tweed Ring and his allies, what they would do is they would call for a competition of sorts. Like, oh, we need a new playground built for the children of New York City. And essentially what they would do is they'd put the offer out there. Hey, anyone that's interested in getting this contract, this city contract to build this playground, let me know. And the thing was, you wanted city contracts because it was guaranteed money. You didn't have to worry about somebody running off and not paying you. You didn't have to worry about a business, transaction where somebody couldn't pay up because they'd gone out of business or run out of money or gone bankrupt or anything like that. So there was a lot of eager interest in businesses to get city contracts. What would happen is each of these different companies would seek to win this contract from Boss Tweed. And the way they would do it wasn't just by having the best company or offering the best deal or having a strong reputation. They would meet with Tweed and essentially bribe him. Say that if you give us this contract to build this park, we will make sure that some money comes back to you. This was all done on the low. This wasn't done in any obvious way because then it would be easy to nail them for corruption. Corruption is doing things illegally or improperly for personal gain. And nobody's giving out envelopes that say bribe. You just can't do that. So everything was done very subtly, but those groups that chose to, quote, play ball, do things in this political machine process sort of a way, they were the ones that won city contracts. What would happen then is when Tweed agreed, he would go to the city council and say, yes, we're going to give this company, and we'll use an example. We'll use Burt Cascom, my alter alias. We're going to go with Burt Cascom Construction to build this playground in Lower Manhattan. Now, the project itself might be $100,000, but he would list the project as $200,000. He'd inflate the actual cost of the project. City council would approve, because he would make sure that when they approved that $200,000, that the council members would get their taste. They would get their piece of that extra money that they just allotted to pay for this project. And, this is corruption. You know, they're overcharging, and the money for all this, mind you, is coming from New York City taxpayers. And it was extraordinarily illegal, but it happened all of the time. It was just regular. It was just normal. And the way it worked so well was that these politicians and those people that were in power to try and stop these things, they were tempted by the money. You know, so if once you take the money, your hands are dirty. If your hands are dirty and then you try to reveal truth about someone else, well, then you're getting yourself in trouble. So it was really difficult for anyone to stop Boss Tweed once he got going, because he was very generous with once he got the over expenditure of this money, he would spread around the money. He'd pay off judges and cops and investigators and other politicians and other council members. And you wanted to be on his good side, because you were going to get an envelope simply for doing nothing but keeping your mouth shut. It was in your best interest to just stay quiet. And even if you were an honorable and honest person and really disliked this entire process of corruption, you know, who are you going to tell? Who are you going to tell? No, everyone's hands were dirty, or so many people's hands were dirty, that by you being the Boy Scout, by you being the good person, you were just making yourself look bad. And it was going to be very difficult for you to get support when you wanted to run for re-election, and you were going to make yourself unpopular. You know, you just were intimidated out of doing anything. And then here, we have some examples of overcharging. The New York County Courthouse, which had been under construction for years, it wound up costing more than $13 million. This is more than what we paid to buy the territory of Alaska in 1867. So this was an extraordinarily huge overcharging of the New York City taxpayers. They had to pay for this. And how did they do this? They would say, oh, well, we paid this carpenter $360,000 for a month's work. And first, no, they didn't. They would just report it that way. And that's how they would justify these overinflated prices. Or they would say, oh, well, this plasterer, this person who like puts up walls and uses plaster to kind of make sure the walls stay in place. Oh, we paid them $133,000 for their labor. And it's like, first, wait, if anybody looked more carefully, they realized, wait, you paid him that much money for 2 days' work? You know, but nobody was really reporting this. Nobody was looking at the numbers too carefully, because, again, everyone was getting this money from Tweed, and it was in their best interest to just shut up. But this is just how they covered their expenses. And this allowed Tweed to stay in power. He was the one getting that company the contract, so they're happy. The people of that community that got the playground, they're happy. The politicians that he was friends with, that he gave this money to, they're happy. They get their money. Who's not happy? With the taxpayers, because their taxes are gradually going up and up and up. But who are you going to complain to? And then the companies that didn't want to give bribes, they were unhappy. But again, who are you going to complain to? So it was sort of like everyone was aware that something was amiss, that something was wrong, but it was just the way things were done. This is how the political machine worked. Just shut your mouth, take your money, and let's keep it moving. And this worked for a long time. And Boss Tweed became very wealthy, but he became more important than money. He became very powerful. He became like, despite the fact he wasn't the governor or the mayor of New York, he ran New York. And doing it in this way made him a criminal. But again, who's going to tell? Well, enter Thomas Nast. He and his crew, the Tweed Ring, they call them the Tweed Ring, they're unchallenged for years and years and years. And Thomas Nast comes into this. He was a cartoonist. He's best known for drawing the pictures that we have today of Santa Claus and the representatives, the images that are associated with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, the donkey and the Republican elephant. He's best known for that. And he's hired by Harper's Weekly because he draws really well. Remember, the population of New York City had boomed with all these new immigrants coming into New York City who couldn't really read very well, but they liked pictures, and they would buy the magazine or they would buy the newspaper if they liked the pictures. So political cartoonists and cartoonists that drew funny images and things that were easy to follow, they were in great demand. So Thomas Nast, an immigrant himself from Germany, he's hired, and he's drawing these pictures. And at first, nobody's paying any mind, but then he starts drawing pictures of what he sees happening in New York City, this corruption. And he does it very simply at first. I'm going to show you this image here. If you look here, this picture here, this is one of his first cartoons that he draws about New York City politics. And he draws here this cartoon, and it's called The Brains. Now, nowhere on it does it say Boss Tweed. but Boss Tweed was known to be a very large man and a very fancy dresser, and to sometimes wear a medallion. So this image was pretty obvious who it was, especially when he entitled it "The Brains." So right away, this picture came out, and people realized, oh wow, this looks like him. If you look at this picture here, you can see there's a similarity: the fancy clothes, kind of a larger man, balding, a beard. They didn't show that in the cartoon, but the largeness of him and the dress of him really showed who he might be. And then more cartoons started to come out, like this cartoon here, the Tammany Tiger. What are you going to do about it? If you look up here, it's drawn to look like a Roman Colosseum where people would watch, these prisoners take on, each other or fight tigers and lions and things like that. And people would watch them tear themselves apart for entertainment. And up here, look who's watching. And now you can see his face a little bit. It clearly looks like Boss Tweed and his Tweed Ring, his associates, watching the tiger tear apart this person, except the person represents New York City taxpayers. And the tiger represents their political machine, the way they're doing things. And even the subtitle of this is, what are you going to do about it? And it's really drawn very negatively towards Tweed and other members of his Tweed Ring, or the Tammany Ring. And after a while, Tweed becomes very aware of these cartoons and that they're starting to blow up the spot, so to speak. They're starting to let people know beyond New York City what's happening in New York City. Up until this point, it had kind of been a secret that everybody knew, but nobody was talking about it. Everyone just kind of kept their mouths shut. But now these cartoons are blowing up the spot and putting this information out there. Tweed attempts to meet with Nast and ask him to stop, and then he tries to bribe Nast, and then he tries to intimidate Nast into stopping these cartoons. Because he's just afraid that more attention eventually is going to bring the federal government into New York City, and then they're going to look at the books and they're going to realize that something's wrong. Nast won't be bought, and he continues drawing. And here's the thing: Nast becomes so popular from these cartoons that sales go up of Harper's Weekly, and it becomes very difficult for Boss Tweed to eliminate him because he'd be the prime suspect. So he can't really stop Nast. And eventually what happens is what he was afraid of. The federal government becomes aware of what's happening in New York via these cartoons and the sales of this magazine, Harper's Weekly. And they send federal investigators into the accounting offices of New York City, and they look through the tax coffers and they realize, oh my gosh, look at all of this money that's being spent. What is it being spent on? And they realize that the amount of money that's been collected and spent doesn't equal what they actually got for that money. And they realize that something's wrong, that there's been corruption. Tweed and his people, they try to flee, they try to escape. Tweed makes it all the way to Spain, but eventually, through extradition, he's sent back to America, and he's found guilty, arrested, convicted, and he dies in a New York City prison. It helps bring attention to the idea of corruption. That's what these cartoons are so important about. And who knew? Usually you think it would be some other great political leader, or there'd be some movement, or there'd be some sort of protest. But in the end, it was this German immigrant cartoonist, Thomas Nast, and his ability to convey really significant messages in very simple imagery. So like we saw here, we've got cartoon 1, The Brains, cartoon 2, The Tammany Tiger, and this one was maybe the most significant of all of them. And he titles this one, Who Stole the People's Money? Do Tell, 'Twas Him. And you see, here's Boss Tweed and his other members of the Tammany Ring, or the Tweed Ring, and they all seem to be blaming somebody else. Not me, it was the other guy. Look at all their their fingers. They're all pointing at somebody else. Wasn't me, wasn't me, wasn't me. Well, it was all of them. And ultimately, that's what brings down Boss Tweed and makes people a little bit more aware of crime and corruption, and leads to great changes and reforms in our political process. Is corruption over? Absolutely not. There is corruption still, and it finds different ways of presenting itself. But for the first time in a long time, at that point, it made people become a little bit more responsible and aware of what their politicians were doing. And it made voters a little bit more aware of what their lawmakers were doing, their elected representatives were doing. And every little bit helps. Does it fix the problem? No. Does it make things better? Many would argue it does. So, hope you liked it. And tell me what you think. Hopefully this helps my current 8th graders that are studying this right now or about to study this. And for those of you that were in my class, or some of you that are just simply interested in learning a little bit about history, I hope you like it. Subscribe, if you're not already, to Social Studies Bascom. And leave some comments, positive ones, please. Positive vibes only, guys. All right. Hope you liked it, and I'll talk to you soon.